Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be looking at Italeri's relatively new F35B Lightning 2 in 1/48 scale. I've already done the 1/72 scale iteration of this kit, so it'll be interesting to have a look. So anyway, on with the video. I hope you enjoy. This kit begins, as per most kits these days, in the cockpit, specifically with the seat. This seat was actually very nicely detailed, had some crisp details with some pipes and I don't know, wires, things that you'd find on an ejection seat. I was quite pleasantly surprised at the quality of the seat, considering the 1/72 scale, in my opinion, lacked a bit of detail. So this slotted together like a usual sort of seat. You have your back plate, two side pieces, and then your cushion or body which slips inside of it. A very common way to assemble the seat, but it works, so you can't fault it. With the price that you pay for this kit, which is about £65 on most reasonable retailers, you are expecting something premium as per se. In the case of Italeri, they do offer a photo etch fret with the kit, which I had no problems with, and I thought it was relatively in scale and just added a new level of detail. So thumbs up there, but maybe it could have been a bit bigger of photo etch fret, as you only got maybe 4 or 5 pieces in the entire kit. But something is better than nothing, as some would say. So the way that I attached and work with photo etch is, as most people do, I use, instead of our normal sort of cements to secure the photo etch, I use a CA glue. Specifically, I think I use UHU or UHU glue. I'm not too sure on the pronunciation, but I use a CA glue. Going back to what you can see me doing on screen, I am just populating a few items in the cockpit tub. They have some nicely moulded control sticks and throttles, and I thought they all looked reasonably detailed and in scale, which is all I will ever ask for. I then give it, I don't actually prime it, I just give it a straight up coat of gold grey, and then I'm picking out any of the highlights or pieces in black which need to be picked out. I do this using Vallejo's black paint, and I use a fine tip brush. Up until a couple of videos ago, I had quite a few people point out the horrific state of the brushes that I was using. Since then, I have upgraded my brushes, and I've definitely seen a difference. So I didn't go all out and spend, you know, £30–40 on some brushes. I just got some slightly nicer ones, slightly thinner ones from Hobbycraft for about £10, and it definitely helps in the control and the final result. So maybe it is time sometimes to invest a little bit in your modelling gear. Whilst I've been rambling on about brushes, you've been seeing me use a dry brushing technique on any of the black elements in both the cockpit tub and also the ejection seat. This just highlights some of the raised details and brings another dimension to your modelling. Speaking of bringing more dimensions, I then dabbed small bits of white oil paint onto a couple of the cushions and then blended it in. This is just to give a slightly more worn effect to the seat. So here you can just see me picking out the harness with a lighter grey colour. Wasn't too picky or didn't really use any reference images for this, just kind of went with what looked good and rolled with it. Onto the control panel, here you could see me use the exact same techniques as I'd previously discussed with the gold grey, the dry brushing and picking out of panels. I then used the kit supplied decal and put it onto the required area, and then to make it look like a screen, I just got some clear varnish and dabbed it on. This gives the effect of a slight bit of reflection and makes it look like a screen rather than a sticker. So really simple little tip to make your models look just that little bit more realistic. Once all dry, it slots into the cockpit bay with no fit issues. You can then see me putting in another piece of photo etch. This time still no issues with the fit or the size or the bending of it, and it is once again secured with CA glue. After that was done, it was time to populate the upper half of the fuselage. The fuselage comes in 2 halves, so I was putting the cockpit tub in along with the ejection seat and a couple of other little items which are shown in the instructions. I couldn't tell you what they are because my knowledge of the F-35 really isn't that good. The engineers over at Italeri definitely did a good job here of making sure that the modeler receives quite a simplistic yet effective way of putting all of these components onto the fuselage. Didn't have too many issues. There was an issue here, however, as you'll see in a second when I put the left side of the back. It isn't really a cowling, but the back of this, there's quite a big seam down the middle. I don't know why this couldn't have been molded as maybe one part. So to sort this out, I used some super glue, let it dry and sand it back, my usual sort of technique for getting rid of seams. So here you can see me drilling out a couple of holes in preparation for the gun pod, which I was going to be putting onto this F35, but as I will talk about later, I ran into some issues here. But instructions are very clear and tell you exactly where you need to make holes and for what option. And on the whole, the instructions were very good. I didn't have any issues with misleading parts in the instructions or misleading directions. So 2 thumbs up there for Italeri. So onto my bugbear of the kit was this, the wings being joined onto the fuselage. The F35, if you've seen it in real life or seen pictures, you know it's a very, very smooth fuselage. There's no real steps at all. It's just, it looks like a spaceship, and the way that Italeri have designed this kit, or the way that the parts have come out, it results in a huge seam and a huge step, and that, in my opinion, is unacceptable. It did require a lot of work. You can see the sheer amount of super glue that I had to use, and then I started from about a 150 grit and worked all the way up to 1200 and then polished just to try and get it to an alright condition. In the end, I did manage to get it there, and it can be done with relative ease, but you just have to make sure that you've got a good video on the background because you are going to be doing a lot of sanding. So keep that in mind before you pick up this kit, and make sure you have a good mojo beforehand. On to some more positives of the kit. Here you can see me detailing up the weapons bays. I'm just very, very carefully painting each of these little hydraulic lines or electrical lines. Not too sure what they are, but if you know what they are, do tell me. I thought these were actually quite adequately detailed. Following on with that, I thought this is the front nose gear bay. That was also very nicely detailed, and it slips together, and all of these components slip together and fold together really nicely. This part of the build went quite quickly for me. This was all done in about maybe an afternoon, just because of how simple it all slipped in together, which is a credit due to the engineering that Italeri does offer here. On to a more personal note of the modelling, I think I definitely could have improved the nose gear bay here by potentially using a wash, or maybe using some different colours just to jazz it up a little bit. I think I did good at highlighting some of the details, but I think a wash is definitely necessary, and I'm not too sure how I missed out doing that or just didn't register doing that, as I do use washes a lot if you've watched a couple of my videos. So here you can see me putting in the main landing gear legs for the F35. I had very similar feelings about this with the 1/72nd scale F35 that Italeri did. They were very rugged, they were very secure, and they looked nicely detailed as well. So I was very, very happy that this was carried over from the 1/72nd scale into the 1/48th scale. This is because there really is nothing worse than going the whole way through a model, getting it all nicely painted up, looking absolutely brilliant, and then you go to put it to rest on its own weight and it just collapses because the manufacturer hasn't taken into account that this is a heavy model that requires, you know, some substantial support. And Italeri has definitely done a good job of taking into account that this is going to be a heavy model if you are using the beast mode configuration, and you will definitely have the support with the landing gear for it. So once again, I'm pretty happy with that. Do make sure to pay very careful attention to the instructions when you are constructing these weapons bays. Make sure you put in all of the different connection points that you are going to need to make sure you can mount your GBU-12s, I think, that go in the bomb bay. Maybe GBU-12s, not too sure, but just make sure they're in there, otherwise you're going to have a couple of headaches getting those in later on in the build. A nice difference here with the 1/48 scale versus the 1/72 scale F35 is the fact that there are a couple of actual external or separate components which have to be fitted into the weapons bays rather than them just being solely moulded. It just adds another level of detail, which I was a fan of. Speaking of fans, here you can see me painting up the the fan which is behind the cockpit. I guess this is the VTOL fan, we can call it. Not too sure, not very technical, but it sounds correct. So that was all painted up, and then there's quite a nice little sub-assembly which has to all be built up. Do make sure, if you are going to be displaying this in the VTOL version, so all the hatches open and whatnot, that all of these components are painted, because you can see a lot more of this than you think. So even if you think you're being overcautious with how much you paint, just do it, because it is nothing worse than having a finished model and you look in somewhere and it isn't painted and you can just see the bare plastic. All of these sub-assemblies go together really nicely. Once again, as I said earlier, this was just a quick job, which is what you want with these sub-assemblies. You want to get on to the more laborious part of making an F35, which I will go over when we get to it, as soon as possible. So having a speedy building process is definitely an advantage here. Italeri once again offer a very nice detailed engine, even though you probably won't see much of it, but it's nice that they go to the effort of actually moulding it. Speaking of nice efforts from Italeri, they have also made sure here to make sure that there's a notch in this back firewall plate thingamabobby to make sure that you get the right orientation of the engine. It's a small detail, but it's a detail which really helps the modeler and just adds to the modelling experience. So on to a little bit of a dreaded part of the build when you are building jets these days, or modern jets, and that is the intake. I had relatively good luck or success with the 1/72 scale version of the intakes for this kit, and it was continued on in this kit. They have a really nice system where the seam is actually on the top and the bottom of the intake and not on the sides, so it's way less noticeable. Once we have all of these sub-assemblies all put together, it's time to put them into the bottom fuselage. This was a little bit fiddly getting all of these sort of things in. However, take your time, be patient, and you definitely can get there. Also, a pair of tweezers is definitely required, as you can see here, to almost feed that through and get it connected inside. Otherwise, well, I don't know, maybe I have fat fingers, but I definitely couldn't have done that with just my fingers alone. So make sure you have some tweezers nearby. The tolerances on this kit are definitely quite small, so make sure that your cleanup of all the parts is very good, or maybe a little bit above what you would usually do, just to ensure that you are having all the correct fits and having no issues. Once all of those sub-assemblies are all connected and secure inside of the bottom half of the fuselage, we can bring the top half of the fuselage and connect it together. Once that is done, we can then go on with a couple more assemblies. This time you can see me working on the vertical stabilizers. These also have a very distinctive angle on the F35, and Italeri do a good job at using some nice big sort of pins to make sure that you get them at the right angle. Here you can see me putting them in here. There is definitely a little bit of wiggle room with these vertical stabilizers, so just hold them there a little bit longer while the cement is curing. So moving on to the underside of the wings, if you are going to be displaying this kit in the beast mode configuration, which is used by the USA, make sure that you drill out all of those holes. There's nice big guide holes, so I'm sure you won't have an issue there. Moving on to looking at the horizontal stabilizers, these go on in a slightly unique way. They utilize a bit more of a butt joint sort of way of getting them onto the fuselage. I didn't have too many issues here, however I do recommend you holding them in place either with some masking tape, just to make sure that you get a good bond, as it isn't as secure as some other ways of fitting items to the fuselage. The flaps / ailerons fit on in a very similar way. I think they're flap ailerons, something like that. The nose also goes on really quite well. So moving on to doing some masking, here you can see me layering on some masking tape for the canopy. So the way that I mask off my canopies, if I haven't already bought a pre-cut mask set, is I will layer on Tamiya's masking tape, and I will use my little pincers there just to slightly score the outline of where the frame of the canopy is. Then I will come along with my X-Acto knife and just score along the already kind of marked out details. Be very careful if you are going to do this, as it is very easy to damage your plastic. However, once you've done that, just peel it off and it works really well, and you may save yourself a few pennies on a mask set. Here you can see me attaching the final piece of photo etch to this kit. To bend this into shape, I used the back of, I believe it was my paintbrush, just to try and get the curve shape, and then I used CA glue once again just to get it in there. When attaching these pieces into the canopy, I made sure to use PVA glue, not as strong, however it will dry clear, which is quite a necessity, as you don't really want to have fogged up plastic being the first thing that you see on this kit. So Italeri have actually done a really good job here of making sure that there's more than adequate detail on the inner of the canopy. I think quite a few manufacturers do actually forget this step when manufacturing kits, and it does add this whole new level of realism to the kit. The canopy was then secured onto the fuselage using some PVA glue, once again to prevent any fogging. After this was done, the entire model was given a coat of Ammo's one-shot primer. You know how much I use this stuff and how much I enjoy using this stuff. After that was done and it had left me a nice smooth coat, it was time to go on with the actual colours for this kit. So after taking some feedback from my 1/72 scale version of this kit, I had quite a few comments, quite passive aggressive comments, saying how I had got the wrong colour for the F35 and how my F35 was too dark. So to resurrect this issue in my 1/48 scale, I went with Tamiya's XF83 RAF medium sea grey. I do think that this is a much better match, or at least a much lighter match to some of the F35s, but as I discussed in the previous video, the F35 grey is such a debated and, you know, confusing topic, as sometimes in different lightings it's a lighter grey, and then you look at it in different lightings and it almost looks black, and it's very confusing. However, I hope that this is the right colour in your opinion. So I opted to get some masks for the ram tape for this kit, as there are no supplied decals, unlike the recently released Tamiya kit which supplies some decals for the ram tape. This one doesn't, so a mask set was necessary. This was applied with no issues at all, everything went on really nicely, and the actual sort of vinyl material didn't pull up any paint, so I was very happy. So I used, as you can see on screen, the DN Models mask kit. It was brilliant and I highly recommend it. Here's what it looked like before I was on to doing all the painting. So when it comes to actually painting on the ram tape, I used Ammo's medium sea grey. I know I used a medium sea grey by Tamiya for the actual base or base colour, main fuselage colour. However, this one just seemed to be a much lighter medium sea grey, and I think it was very fitting. This was the exact colour which I used on my 1/72 scale version, and I liked how it came out, so I thought, why don't I just use it again? So something interesting which I picked up on was how many more masks that there were in the DN Models kit compared to the Edward kit mask set which I used on the 1/72 scale version. I was quite taken back by the sheer amount of panels which Edward had missed out. Maybe it's because it's in 1/72 scale, but still I think there might have been room for improvement there. So talking about room for improvement, I really do think that there was room for improvement by Italeri for the detail on this exhaust. So when in VTOL mode, the F35's back exhaust is just, it's covered in wires and all sorts, and albeit yes, Italeri did do quite a good job of moulding a couple of raised panels and stuff. However, it doesn't give the effects that I think could be achieved in 1/48 scale, and after having to battle with the huge wing seam and all of the masking and everything that had to be done, I had no effort to get some wire out and do some scratch building. Also sorry for my hair on screen there. However, it didn't completely stop me from doing some detail. I did paint the tips of the exhaust in a slightly lighter metal as on the real thing, and then here you can see me using some of Tamiya's sort of powdery sort of dust thing just to do the raised elements of the internal of the exhaust to give this dirtied up effect. Once this is all done, it's it's slapped onto the model with some nice connection points actually, so not a huge issue, but I do think there is room for improvement there if they do intend on making an updated version of this in the future. So as I was opting to do this in the VTOL configuration, there were an awful lot of panels which had to be opened up and put on this. So they all go on very, very nicely. They have some brilliant good sort of hooks and connection points, so you won't have an issue there, but definitely be prepared to spend a little bit of time on this because there's so many. Here you can see we're doing the main sort of fan hatch, and as you can see the angle is already perfect and it just needs some glue. So the only slight maybe complaint I would have had about this is the fact that some of these panels have their sort of connection points already molded onto them. These ones which are on screen didn't. There was an external part, but if they weren't already, or if they didn't already have their connection points molded on, they could have all been put onto the body of the fuselage while I was painting, and it just would have made the paint job a little bit easier and a little bit more continuous. But it isn't a huge complaint. Maybe it's just me trying to make the modelling process a little bit easier or a little bit quicker. However, it isn't a huge problem, but it could be something for future manufacturers to think about. As you can see, there is a little bit of work that has to be done on the internals of the weapon bays. However, I do think it's a very good idea if you are getting this kit to display the weapon bays open, just so you don't lose all of that brilliant detail. The gear bay doors follow the exact same standard as the rest of the panels. They have nice connection points and the angles are easy enough to get a hang of. So when I'm putting all of these panels on, I actually opted to use Revell contactor glue. It takes a little bit longer to dry, however it's just much stronger, and as I might be taking this model to the model club or maybe to future competitions, although I really don't think it's competition worthy, it's just good to make sure that you have a little bit more rigidity on these external elements so they don't just get flung off as soon as something brushes past them. So as soon as all of those weapon bays were on, it was time to repeat the masking process that I used on the canopy, but this time I applied it to the wheels. Exact same way, it's some masking tape, then I scored over and then just cut it out. Really simple technique, doesn't take too long and just prevents you buying or having to buy a mask set. So as I was displaying this in beast mode, there are an awful lot of pylons that have to be put together. These go together in a very usual in a way which you've seen from every manufacturer ever. However, I'm not complaining. Well, maybe I am complaining a little bit. I wouldn't have minded if these were all molded in one singular piece. Speaking of having anything molded in one singular piece, I would have loved to have had that with a couple more of the ordnance on this kit. The AIM 120s and also the AIM 9Xs were almost completely in one piece, with the exception of having to put a couple of fins on. However, I did think I saw a review of a GHW or GWH, one of the two, Grand Wall Hobby, so GWH I think. They have started to actually mold somehow. I'm not too sure how they do it, but they mold the entire missile as one piece, or the entire bomb as one piece, and you just snip it out and sand down the little knob that's on it, which I think it could be a huge selling point for their kits in the future. So all of the ordnance went on really nicely. There are some nice location points, and I also used, I think I used PVA glue here just so I didn't have any small like leakages with the glue or anything, and it would have all dried nice and clear. So it was then time to make sure that I had the I don't know, this is where I think the laser goes, or the targeting sort of system is in the front of the nose. There wasn't a mask for this, and I thought instead of just masking it off, I would just completely spray paint it. Then I'll use my little cocktail stick thingy, pointy, stabby thing, and just scrape off all the paint. So that was then secured onto the model, and then the entire model was given a nice I think it was 1 or 2 coats of Mr. Hobby's gloss varnish, and then it was on to decaling. I opted for scheme, I think this is scheme C, the Warlords. I'll tell you a little bit about them later, but these decals were actually really nice. They were nice and thin, nice and strong, really nice colours on them. I'm not too sure if they were printed by Cartograph. They seem like Cartograph sort of quality, however I didn't see anything saying that they were Cartograph, but the decals are definitely a highlight for this kit. When it comes to actually applying all the decals, I use my usual sort of method. If you are a returning viewer, you can actually see the 2 bottles there in the background. Micro set goes down first, then I put the decal on, then micro sol. Micro sol is usually applied maybe 5 minutes after I've put the decal down, and then I use a cotton bud just to squeegee out any air bubbles. Then the final bits of ordnance were put on, then it was given a flat coat, and then the final step was to peel off the canopy mask. The canopy mask did a pretty good job for what it is, but with that, the model was done. So, on to the final photos. So, here they are. Here is my take on Italeri's 1/48 scale F35B Lightning II. I'm quite happy with how this kit turned out. I'd say it is one of my better kits that I've done on the channel, with all of the ram tape, all the masking and whatnot, and how I managed to attack the big step on the wing and whatnot. If I could sum this kit up, I'd say it is challenging but good fun. I think this is definitely aimed for a more experienced modeler, with all of the masking that has to be done on the ram tape and all of the ordnance and weapons bays and whatnot. However, it is a really good bit of fun. So I will leave you to have a little look at the rest of the photos. I'd like to say a big thank you for watching the video. Do leave a like if you enjoyed, have a little comment, tell me what I did wrong, tell me what I did right. I'll make sure to reply to every single comment. So, that's it for today. I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.